Hello and welcome to the Perfect Place to Put a Practice podcast. My name is Mike Green from Dr. Demographics, and I want to welcome you today. I want to welcome probably lots of new listeners that we've picked up for the last couple weeks as we've been a little bit more consistent, and that's a commitment I'll still make to you as I will do my best to be consistent on these podcasts. And if you're just listening to the podcast, thank you so much, but you might be missing out on the full video version. I have a presentation that goes with each of these podcasts. Might be a little easier to visualize it. You can see that on our website, drdemographics.com. Go to the blog section, or you can also view it on YouTube. Just search Dr. Demographics and you'll see our YouTube channel and you can view it there. I also post a video version on LinkedIn and Twitter X and all those other places. So lots of places to see it. But again, if you're just listening to it on your drive to work today, then I want to welcome you. I'm glad you're here. And today we're going to talk about how close is too close, looking at a competition analysis. That is a big question that we get. I would say at least once every single day is, hey, I'm looking at this area, there's competition around the corner, or there's competition a few miles away. How close is too close for that competition? Should I be looking elsewhere? And our short answer is, well, I'll give you the details on the short answer in a second, but long answer is, it really depends, like everything else, what your tolerance is for a competition, whether you're just going to go out there and market like crazy and you don't care who sees it or what sees it, or if you're trying to maintain, a certain status within the community and not ruffle too many feathers. There's a lot of factors that go into that. And so we'll go through some of those national benchmarks as far as what we look at Dr. Demographics when we're making some decisions and whether we're going to recommend an area to you or not. We'll also look at some factors that you should be considering when you're looking at the map and your real estate person's giving you a few different options for practice placement. Some things that you might want to consider when looking at that to make sure that it's matching up with what you hope that practice is going to be. So let's dive right in, and let's look at some of those benchmarks that we are looking for, or we are looking at, and I'm going to just really simplify it here. And there's a lot more factors and ratios and things that go into it, but on a really simple scale, if you are a general practitioner, so you are a general dentist, or you're an optometry practice, or you're a general veterinarian that sees any and all, not a specialist, you're not trying to really niche down, but if you're just general practice, we really want to see a population of at least 1,500 to 2,500, somewhere in that range, people per provider. And some of the things we look at when we're looking at that number, when it drops below 1,500, there's other factors into play, such as population density. Is this a large area and this is where the concentration of all the businesses are? Or is this a really rural area and this is the only place that has commercial office? There's lots of factors that go into that. But when it gets under 1,500, we really need to know why it's under 1,500. Is it truly because it is really competitive? When it gets above 2,500, and we certainly see areas that are 8, 10, 15,000 people per provider, when it gets above that, we need to also know why. Why is it that there's no doctor? Has there been doctors here in the past and they just haven't been able to be successful for whatever reason? Or is this an area that is growing, like crazy? And if that's the case, is that the reason that the population has outpaced the providers, which happens all the time? So there's a lot of factors there that could play into it, but we want to make sure we understand the whys for both below and above those numbers. Now, if you're a specialty practice, it really, of course, we're still looking at population size, absolutely, but we're also looking at how many potential referring providers there are for a specialist. And again, I'm not going to take the time here to go through every single specialty and what those numbers would be, but I would say in a general basis, the absolute ideal situation is that you would have 20-ish potential referring providers per practice. Now, I would say in the busiest parts of the country that really is not possible. And so what you want to do is look at what your strategy would be based on how many potential referring partners are out there. Is this an area where there's a couple of really established providers? And so, you're going to have to break into that market. There's a lot of factors there. So just as general numbers, be looking at those two ratios for the general practice and the specialty practice. So let's look at some very specific demographic factors that you should be considering when you're looking at competition and how much competition is in one area or the other and how that may play into your particular practice. The first one is population density. Obviously, when you have a really dense area of the city, that high population support can support multiple practices. Now, this is the thing you've got to consider. High population density in where they live or high population density in where they work. We are seeing now in 2025, when I'm recording this podcast, a trend back from working from home back to having to go into work. And so they are having to go back downtown. So if we look at Atlanta or Chicago or New York or some of these places where the last really since COVID, they've been able to work from home, a lot of those companies are now requiring their employees to come back to work. And so it's very important that you don't just look at the population as a whole. You have to look at what the daytime population is for that area when considering that practice. Well, again, depending on what type of practice you are. But also if you're in an area that is really concentrated on where the providers are, be it schools or businesses, retail, and service providers such as a dentist or a veterinarian or something like that, a lot of times there is going to be a really thick concentration of those providers in a relatively small geographic area that's going to provide support for a large geographic population area. And so don't be freaked out if the numbers come back and the ratios are way too small, if that's the case in the area that you're looking at, which again is very, very common in big metro areas where they maybe don't have, where you've got miles and miles and miles of housing developments and don't necessarily have the retail space, or rather the commercial space, to be able to open up a practice. And so you've got to really take in population densities for the area, daytime population. Super important to understand that, as that's going to really work into your practice strategy. Second thing is the population growth trends. Is the area growing strong and better than what it was before? And what you want to be able to do is look kind of historical and look at what has been that trajectory for the population growth. And is it different now? And if so, why? Was there a large employer that just moved in? And we talked about that in previous podcasts. South Carolina, Texas, some of those areas are really growing strong, North Carolina too, with new businesses. And so a lot of times these big employers such as Amazon or Tesla or an auto manufacturer, for example, they're going to bring in a huge population of middle to upper middle class people that could change the growth trajectory, population growth trajectory dramatically. And so you've got to be looking at what direction is that trajectory going, and maybe it's peaked off, and maybe it is really plateaued, or it's decreasing. And again, you've got to be able to answer those questions of why, what is happening here, and how is that going to play into that growth. When we see an area that has just dynamic growth, 4, 5, 6, 7% annually, we know typically something is happening in the area. Austin has experienced that. Phoenix experienced that in certain areas. And so we've got to be able to answer those questions why, so that you can make a good educated guess, or so that we can help you make a good educated strategy when you're looking at that practice. Another thing with the population is age distribution. Who is moving into the area? Is it young families with little kids, or is it a retiree area? Did Pulte build a big Del Webb community for 55 plus, and now you have 5,000 new retirees that have moved to the area? Again, this is something we've seen in California, Texas, Florida, certainly all over the place. That you need to know, so you know what type of services to put out there in your marketing and put out there and be competitive. And frankly, when you have a shift in the age distribution, it gives you a competitive advantage over the existing practices that are in that area, because they may, like the doctor that's been there for 20 years is probably not going to be as up on what's happening with the population age distribution as what you'll be as a new practice. And so you can go in, identify what the change in the trajectory is, and then you can capitalize. It makes a big difference. Last thing that you want to consider on this section for the demographic factors is the income and the insurance coverage. Now, just a quick side note, Dr. Demographics does not have specific insurance information for the area, but we can look at incomes and population segments, and we can make a pretty good idea of whether this is going to be a fee-for-service area, heavy area, if it's going to be a very meat and potatoes insurance-driven area, or if it's going to be a Medicaid area. And so you can, and none of those are good or bad, right? It's just more depending on what type of practice you want to set up. And we want to make sure that you're matching your expectations of the practice you want to build is going to match the area that you're in. So let's look specifically at some, nuts and bolts on the competition analysis that you should be looking at. Again, first of all, number of nearby dentists. You're looking at how much that population, that daytime population, 1,500 to 2,500 people per dentist. Again, that's a very loose benchmark that may not be significant in the area that you're looking at, and that's why we're here to help you answer those questions. Second thing is the competitor strength and weaknesses. That it's really critical, especially in these type of services. If you're opening up a dental practice, we see a vast difference in the way that a practice is presenting themselves to the community, the way that practice is marketing themselves and their services in certain parts of the country as opposed to others. And so, for example, if you're going to a Texas, to an Arizona, to a Utah, to some places in Florida, it's going to be very, very competitive. You have very savvy marketers in those areas. Why? Because they're very, very good. And so if you're going to open up your practice in one of those areas, you better doggone well know your marketing. You've got to be aggressive, and that's how you're going to be able to compete in those markets. And if you do, it can be extremely successful for you. But you certainly do not want to go into those areas and say, we're just going to flip the open sign on in the window and we'll call her good. Then you're just not going to be nearly as successful as you can be. As opposed to, for whatever reason, California seems to have a lot of practices that don't market themselves very well, in our opinion. And so you can be a half-decent marketer and probably be in the top 20% in a lot of areas of California and really be able to stand out and do well. And so you've got to really look at your particular area. What are the strengths and weaknesses? Who are the top 5 practices for that area? One thing to note for those of you that are listening to that, we are putting the final touches on a new competitor analysis report that we're going to offer. If that's something that would be interesting for you, please shoot me an email, mike@drdemographics.com. Let me know that that's something you're interested in, and that'll motivate us to get past the last little bit and getting that report ready for you. Third thing, you want to be looking at what services are offered. Now, if you've done this right and you have really defined what your unique selling position is, it's going to be very, very important. When you look at dentistry, for example, are you specializing in cosmetic dentistry or pediatric or implants, or what is it that you're going to specialize in, and then look at what the competition is related to that. You can't just say, only show me the pediatric dentists or doctors in the area. That's not going to cut it, because you'll have a lot of general offices that will market themselves to families that have kids. And for those families, they a lot of times don't know the difference between a general dentist and a pediatric dentist. And so if you're a pediatric dentist, you better tell them. You've got to educate them. You've got to tell them why they might choose you over just a standard family practice. You want to look at the office capacity and reputation. If you're looking at an area and the 3 closest practices are really small, they're kind of run down, but they're like the established areas, that you can go in, probably build a shiny new practice and be able to use that in your marketing to attract people to come over and visit you. And so, you've got to look at all those factors at the actual brick and mortar buildings that are around you that are occupied by your competition, and look at the state that they're in, and then develop your strategy based on what you find. The next area that I want to talk about just for a second is location and accessibility. So, and we're going to do an episode on this probably next week, but visibility and foot traffic. One of the questions we get all the time is, should I be placing my practice near Whole Foods or Walmart or Costco or this elementary school or that high school, or is it okay to place that practice off the beaten path a little bit? We'll go into that a lot more as far as our opinion on that probably next week. But in short, I think it's sixes. If you're going to open a practice that's right next to a high traffic area, you're probably going to spend a lot more for that real estate, and it's worth it, right? Because you're piggybacking on the marketing that Walmart is doing or Costco is doing, and you're kind of, you're not hijacking, but you're piggybacking on that traffic that they're already generating, and that's very, very valuable. Whereas if you're off the beaten path a little bit, your real estate's probably going to be less, but you're not really going to, in my opinion, most times you're not going to save a lot of money, because you're going to be putting it into marketing, explaining to people how to get and find your practice. Now, I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. I think both ways can be very successful, and it's very location dependent. I love to see marketers, and so if you can find an awesome location that's off the beaten path and you're a fantastic marketer, then go for it. I think that shouldn't be something that holds you back. But if you're a little nervous about your ability to market, or you don't have the funds or the marketing IQ to really go after it, then you may need to be looking at a more high traffic location to kind of solve that piece of it for you. You want to be looking at parking and transportation, obviously. When you're looking at where your competition is the public transportation closer to them than it would be for you? Is the parking a challenge where you're at, whereas somebody else has easy parking? If you're looking at a older population, that you're doing prosthodontics, or you're doing even a veterinary office is doing a small animal that has a lot of retirees with their little doggy or little cat, they want to be able to park and not have to walk very far. And you will be shocked how many of your potential clients and patients will choose somebody else because they don't want to have to walk an extra 30 yards or have to ride an elevator or go up some stairs or whatever it is. You've got to be very convenient based on who your clients are going to be. If you're looking at a 20-something high income job, living the life, It's okay to be in an area that looks very high boutique, high money, high income. Again, where your location is has to match exactly who you want to bring in as a patient. You want to look at the proximity of your referral sources. Obviously, if you're if you're an endodontist, or you're a someone that is truly going to be reliant on referrals almost completely, you do want to be around areas that are going to be able to do that. So if you're going to be by a medical building or hospital or something like that, you've got to look into that consideration of who is it that's going to be sending patients your way, and how hard is it for that patient going to be to find you. Lots of studies have been out there showing that close to I think it was 35% of patients that are referred don't ever make it to who they were referred to. And so when you consider what 35% of your current patients are that don't find you, how much that actual equals in dollars and cents, it's a ridiculous amount of money. And so you can't afford to lose out on any of those referred patients and clients that are coming to you. So it's really important to look at the proximity of your referral sources, making sure that you're facilitating that process as much as possible. Of course, you want to look at zoning regulations. This is really where your local real estate person should be really helping you. They need to be up on these things. There should be no surprises. And if there's going to be a surprise, then you're not talking to the right real estate person. They need to know exactly what the laws are, what they are for your state and your city. That's not something that we go into very deeply on Dr. Demographics, but is something that you need to be relying on your real estate people to know. Absolutely. Now, one of my favorite topics, differentiation and competitive edge. This is really where you go into a situation. Let's say you decide, hey, I want to be by Lake Austin. I want to be in southeast Phoenix, in the area, the Queen Creek area or whatever that's growing so quickly. And you say, I don't care what the competition is. This is where I want to be, and I'm going to open my office. These are areas that you've got to get really good at to be able to be successful in environments like that. The first one being your unique selling proposition. If you have ever talked to me on the phone before, if you've gone through my other stuff, you know how important I pound this topic is, especially in commoditized industries, which dentistry, optometry, veterinary is absolutely, even medical. You're in a commoditized business, meaning that what you provide is very similar to what the guy down the street provides. And so you have to find a way to make your practice stand out. Whether that is in a treatment specifics, for example, like sedation or something like that. Is it an hour strategy? Is it something, maybe you create a spa-like experience that's really popular right now with a lot of practices? Or is it something about you? Is there something that is in your nature or your character that is going to be very unique for the area? That's something you've really got to define and really nail down in order for you to be able to go in these type of environments and feel like you're going to be able to differentiate yourself, because it's probably not going to be on services, right? Like it's going to have to be on something else. You've got to look at your branding and marketing strategy, super strong online presence, community outreach if you're needing to do those kind of things, especially if you're working with kids, if you're working with teenagers, orthodontists, I'm talking to you. Or if you're looking at referral programs, what is going to be that strategy that you're going to be able to build and create a compelling pitch for yourself and your practice, more so than what your competition is going to be out there. And then also looking at technology, especially in some areas, technology is super important. And so if you can go into an area that was stagnant, but then is all of a sudden growing, a lot of those practices there are going to be yesterday's news. And so if you can go in and say, hey, guess what? We have this fancy new machine. This is the benefit that it gives to you as a patient. Makes things, CEREC was something that we saw a ton, right? Like made things so much faster, so much easier. And so there for a while, that was a big deal in creating a differentiating marketing point that you could put out to the community. Again, it's different in every scenario, every situation. Let me just put a quick plug for our mastery program in here. If you go to our website, drdemographics.com, and go to training, you'll see some information on the marketing mastery program. That's something that we've mentored many practices, many doctors to at every stage, from startup all the way down to the last couple of years till they retire, and help them get their marketing in control, strategized, and working for them, so it's not just a giant big waste of time and money. Okay, let's talk about convenience and experience. I know we're going along here. We're going long, but we're going to get through this. So, patient convenience and experience. A couple of things really easy. How is your appointment availability? I would add to that. Do you provide an emergency line, emergency appointments? Some of these areas, somebody calls in and it's weeks before they can get in. And if their tooth hurts now, or Fido got hit by a car, whatever it is, like you have to be able to, or you can, I don't say you have to, but you certainly can use your emergency services time as a big differentiator for what you provide. Insurance payment plans, and I would add to that in-house plans, something that's really popular, especially in high blue-collar areas where they may not have dental insurance through work. If you offer an in-house plan, we've seen that be extremely effective for offices to get loyal patients, get them to come often, and to take advantage of more expensive services over time if you do that effectively. Obviously, customer service, one thing that we talk about a lot is that if you're in an area that has a high percentage of people that speak another language than you, for example, if you're in California and you don't have somebody on your staff, and hopefully your front desk person, that speaks Spanish, you might be causing yourself an issue. You've got to know what the demographics are for the people that are going to be in your area, and make sure that they're going to be comfortable, that they're going to feel like they're not, that there's not a communication barrier. It makes a huge difference for you being successful in communicating with that client and keeping your reputations high. I can't tell you how many times we've seen offices that will have a billing misunderstanding or something like that, and that patient will go on Google and leave them just a nasty review when it was just a misunderstanding, right? And so don't let that happen to you. Make sure that you've got someone that can speak the language on your staff. Real quickly, economic and business considerations, lease versus purchase. You've got to look at what the costs are for renting versus purchasing. One thing that we deal with an awful lot at Dr. Demographics is people who bought a building, their practice went extremely well because we helped them place that practice. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. But also, it just outgrew really quickly. And so, you've got to look at, is it better for me to lease for a little while so I have some flexibility after a few years to go to a new area, bigger office, whatnot? Or, maybe I want to now, my expansion is going to be an additional office. And so, again, it's really good to be able to look at what your 5-10 year plan is so that you can kind of plan through those things a little bit. You want to look at your marketing budget, and again, depending on the area of the country you're in, that could really make a huge difference on how much money you're spending. On average, I would say you spend 1.5 to 2.5% of your gross production per year in marketing, or at least that's kind of a benchmark that you go. But that could be as low as 0.5% all the way up to 5%. Even 10% sometimes, depending on what the market strength is, what the competition level is, and a lot of other factors, and we can kind of help you gauge that a little bit for the area that you're looking at. You want to look at your break-even analysis. You want to talk to your smart people, your CPAs, and make sure that your numbers are matching up, especially if you're going to buy a practice. This is one thing that we've seen a lot of doctors get in a little bit of trouble with, is they will buy a practice, then they will absolutely believe whatever the seller told them as far as numbers come, patient totals, whatnot, without verifying the data, and they find out that it's just not quite as rosy as what they bought. And so they have to adjust that analysis. So the more information you can get on actual data, verified data is where you're really going to want to count on. And lastly, referral relationships. You want to look at if you're in an area, like for example, if you're an orthodontist and you're going to be in an area that just doesn't have a lot of general dentists, you need to know that you are going to get 70, 80, 90, sometimes 98% of your patients directly from the market. They're not going to come from referrals. And so if you are counting on referrals but are not placing your practice in an area where you potentially could gain those referrals, then that's something that obviously is going to be in conflict, and you've got to change your strategy or change your location, one of the two, in order to be successful. Whew! I know that was a lot of information. I tried to give it to you timely, but all things that you need to consider when you're looking at your competition for the area, what is going to impact the decision here or there. And I can tell you from town to town, many of these factors are going to be more significant and some less. And that is really where we come into play, where we are able to help you at Dr. Demographics. So if you'd like a little help, everything from having us run a demographic report on potential sites that you're looking at, all the way down to you just need somebody non-biased to talk to other than a real estate person or your spouse or whatever it is, get in contact with us. Go to drdemographics.com, or you can give us a call at 844-704-0499, or you can email me directly at mike@drdemographics.com. Love to talk to you and figure out the way how we can help you make a great practice location choice, and secondly, make sure that practice choice becomes profitable in the long term. Again, thank you so much for joining us on the Perfect Place to Put a Practice podcast. My name is Mike Green, and we'll see you on the next episode.